Mary has been working on getting all these recordings onto YouTube, and they're now on our website. So when you go there and look through our resources, a number of our talks now are on YouTube. So we want to begin by acknowledging that all of us, wherever we are in this land, are on stolen land. It originally belonged to the Aboriginal people of Australia in the Torres Strait. So we want to honor those folks and acknowledge their leaders, both past, present, and emerging, and thank them for what they've preserved in this land that we can now enjoy. I want to start off with a reflection. This season for many Protestant churches is starting tomorrow is a season of creation. And over the next month, on each Sunday, there will be a different theme from creation. Tomorrow's theme is oceans, but it's all about God's creation. And many churches, liturgical churches, have adopted this whole season to focus on creation and what we need to be doing to preserve it. Mary and I just happen to be preaching at two churches tomorrow, not one, we're at two. And looking at this theme of oceans, the text for tomorrow, two of the Old Testament texts are from Psalm 104 and from Job 38. Often when people think about creation stories, they just go to Genesis 1 and they don't think about many of the other places in Scripture where there are stories about creation. And these two texts are two of those that bring out different stories of creation. But I want to just share a little bit about Job. I won't go through the whole story of Job, you know that, but at the very end, when God finally gets tired of listening to all of these guys ranting and raving, he sits Job down and says, okay, I want to have a conversation with you now. And then he goes about talking about creation, God's involvement in creation. There are two speeches. One takes up chapters 38 and 39. And at the end of that speech, Job doesn't know what to say. He's silent. So God just picks up and goes into another speech for a couple more chapters. But in this chapter 38 and 39, most scholars tend to look at this and think that God is scolding Job and that he's blowing him away with how mighty God is. And look at all the things he's done in creation. But I don't know if you can see this book. It's called Abraham's Silence. It's by J. Richard Middleton. The subtitle is The Binding of Isaac, The Suffering of Job, and How to Talk Back to God. And he deals with Abraham and his silence when he is told to sacrifice his son Isaac. And he compares that to Job and Job talking back to God. It's an excellent study, but I just want to share a little bit about what he says about these speeches where God comes in and talks about creation. He points out that God approves of Job's questioning. Many scholars think that God is scolding him, but actually in Job 42, after the Lord had said these two speeches, he said to Eliphaz, one of the people who also was a friend of Job and said all this kind of stuff about God's justice, and that Job, you must have done something wrong because God wouldn't punish you otherwise. God says, I am angry with you and your two friends because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. And he repeats that a little bit later in the chapter. So twice in this chapter, God actually says, Job was right in what he's saying. He was right to speak back to me. But in these speeches, Middleton says God wants to teach Job something. So he's not just scolding him and blowing him away with his power. He's in some ways teaching him a new creation theology. Middleton says when describing God's first speech in chapters 38 and 39, it's an amazing and complex lesson about creation that God gives Job. Job has questioned God about how God is running the world. And rather than God blowing Job away with his response, as some commentators think, Middleton says God takes Job on a tour of the wonders of the created order. The Creator plans to enlighten Job about what the world is really like. And he says God is correcting Job's creation theology and God's ongoing relationship to the world. Rather than his speech being a show of God's overwhelming power, it shows God's delight in creation. And if you read it that way, to me, it makes so much more sense than this idea that God is bragging about everything he's done and it just blowing Job away. But if you read it, and particularly if you have a translation like I'm going to read from the Message, it picks up this delight that God has in what God has created. Job in his earlier speeches felt that he was ostracized and abandoned by God. But God's delight in even wild animals demonstrates to Job that he is not beyond God's care. This speech also shows that God is intimately involved in creation. God has not made the world and then abandoned it, but God also does not micromanage creation, but gives significant freedom for creation to be itself. One author said, for all the world's order and coherence, it doesn't run like a machine. A certain randomness, ambiguity, unpredictability, and play characterize its complex life. And let me just read a few verses from Job 38. And I hope if you're in one of the churches that follows the season of creation, that you'll be able to look at this a bit further in tomorrow's worship. But God speaks to Job in chapter 38 and says, I want you to, at first he says kind of like, buck up, be a man and talk back to me. And I want you to answer me. And then God begins describing his creation. He said, where were you when I created the earth? Tell me, since you know so much. Who decided on its size? Certainly you'll know that. Who came up with the blueprints and measurements? How was this foundation poured, and who set the cornerstone? While the morning stars sang in chorus and all the angels shouted praise. And then this particularly, I think this is why this passage was chosen for the Sunday that talks about oceans. Who took charge of the ocean when it gushed forth like a baby from the womb? And then in this translation, it said, that was me. And it has an exclamation point. It's God saying, like a proud father, that was me. I birthed this ocean. I wrapped it in soft clouds, and I tucked it in safely at night. Then I made a playpen for it, a strong playpen so that it couldn't run loose, and said, stay here. This is your place. Your wild tantrums are confined to this place. And I love that image of God creating the ocean as a small child and building limits for it and talking about its tantrums. And then a couple more verses. And have you ordered morning to get up and told dawn, get to work? So could you seize earth like a blanket and shake out the wicked like cockroaches as the sun brings everything to light, brings out the colors and shapes? The cover of darkness is snatched from the wicked. They're caught in their very act. And then it goes on and on and on. So if you're not part of a congregation that's following the season of creation, I would encourage you to look it up online and delve into these next 4 Sundays and the passages they have that look at what God has created. And rejoice in that, and then also take up the challenge of what have we been doing to creation? What damage have we done? And how should we be living accordingly to correct a lot of that damage? For those who are following that, I hope you have a good month of looking at these passages. It's ocean, and then I forget what the other 3 Sundays are. And then some traditions end with a blessing of the animals, reflecting on St. Francis and his love of animals. So that's my bit on season of creation. What I want to do at this point is turn it over to Mary to introduce our guest today. We'll take it from there. So Mary, go ahead.
Well, Debbie Armanious is an amazing woman that I had the pleasure of meeting either August or September of 1990. And has been a good friend since then. And I know she started out not as a Christian and ended up questioning. She was working in a dental office and asked the dentist so many questions, he ended up calling in the priest to answer this woman's questions. And then she did become a Christian and started doing all kinds of stuff within the church, like teaching Sunday school. She just happened to be in the park one day and met some of these young adults that had been in her Sunday school class. And she started having a Bible study with them in the park. One thing led to another. She ended up taking a whole bunch of these young adults, not only to Egypt to see their heritage there, but to Soweto. and showing them how blessed they were living in Australia. But the funny thing is, when they went to Australia, or when they went to Soweto, they had 2 suitcases, one for their stuff, and the other stuff they had to have dental equipment, medical equipment, or computer equipment. And I thought, yeah, teach them all kinds of stuff. Since then, what became Exodus YouthWorks is now a community organization that works with a variety of levels, not just young adults. And they deal with people in all kinds of settings. So I'm going to let Debbie talk, but an amazing woman. I hope somebody writes a book about her someday. Welcome, Debbie.
It'll be a short one. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much for tuning in to my story, I guess. My hope is that what we have experienced, and I'm absolutely sure that I'm speaking to people that have experienced what I'm about to speak about more than myself. But certainly my hope is that the wonderful work of God in creation and in his creation will come forward in the 30 minutes. Even now, when I look back, I was saying it today, somebody actually asked me, how is it that you're part of the Coptic Orthodox Church? One, I'm certainly not born Orthodox. And 2, I'm the most unlikely looking Egyptian in the church till today. So how did I end up there? And as Mary said, my family, my background is, my father's family were actually from England. They were Jewish, apparently. So when I've investigated that a little bit further, I can even find relatives. It's all written in Hebrew, and they came out here. They were here on the First Fleet. So I've got 4 grandparents on the First Fleet. My mum's family are from Ireland and also from Scandinavia. So we're pagan, we're Jewish. There's some Irish Catholic mixed in, but by the time they all arrived here in Australia as convicts, nobody wanted to certainly talk to the church nor the government. It's hilarious. I think God has a tremendous sense of humor that he has me speaking to you, who probably come from generations of Christians. So I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity just to share Christ. And I hope, that's what I hope you hear from this crazy story. I did go to school with a Coptic Orthodox person. She got me the job in the dental surgery because her brother had graduated. They were here from Egypt and he had gone to university. So I was exposed to Jesus Christ in a dental surgery. The priest didn't speak English. We're from a very Aussie family. My father was like, no baptisms and, very staunch white Australian, I think, from what I remember. And so we had no contact with migrants even at that time. So we're talking, I'm born in 1961. This nice Egyptian girl that was Coptic Orthodox showed me her life. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I certainly knew that she had something that I wanted, and I couldn't even name it. I didn't know it was God. So the doors of their home were open, and I did get the job at the dental surgery. And one of their bishops, so if you're not familiar with the Coptic Orthodox Church, we're about as Orthodox as it gets. In fact, we're so Orthodox, we think we're the only ones in heaven or going to heaven. They're, 7 sacraments, very liturgical, 2-hour masses on any given day. So they didn't even know how to baptize me. They had only done babies, and in Australia, it was all Egyptians. So long story short, I did get baptized at 15 into the Orthodox Church. Now that I know God's voice, when I look back, he was hard at work, and he picked the most unlikely person to end up where I am today speaking about this. The fact that I was Australian, eventually it seemed that the youth of the church would speak to me more than they would speak to the priests and more to the other servants, because I was Australian. And so this ministry opened up organically, and I was just probably too young to realize what was going on. Sunday school, yes. Youth meeting, yes. Ended up doing some theological studies. ended up superintendent of Sunday school, and then started taking young people to do ministry, but also community service in South Africa in particular. So in Soweto, in other Black townships like Tembisa, and into KwaZulu-Natal. And that's still going on. But 20 years ago, I took a bunch of kids, and they were all what we referred to as wild cards, and they were the guys in the park. I knew them from Sunday school, but they had drifted away, and they drifted away from parish life because the liturgies were still done in Arabic or Coptic, which is the original. It's written in Greek letters, but coming from the hieroglyphic language and then into sort of like a Greek language. So it's like Greek, but plus 6 letters. They weren't fitting in. They were Aussie kids, but they were Egyptian background. They went to Africa. They were young then. Actually, one's in the next room. He's now my chief operating officer of Exodus. Others are now working with the UN and do stints in Darfur, Sudan, and they're much more educated and much more better at the job than I am now. They're on the board of Exodus, and they're now in their, just going into their 40s, I think, just about, near to it. So we had this experience in Africa. We would go 4 times a year. We came back here. They said, we're not going to be going to Africa all the time. Can we do something here? There is a park. There's these guys with, if you know what a shisha is in English, maybe a water pipe with some stuff on the top that was illegal. And what are we going to do with these guys? So we crashed and we hung out at the park for 2 hours, rain or shine, once a week. That first night, there were 5. The next week, there were 10. Within a month, there were 20. It grew to 40 and 50 kids. Very unorthodox, and certainly not completely supported by the Orthodox Church. And of course, it was the white Australian causing trouble, still is. It is now a charity. It is now a non-for-profit organization. It is now 13 paid staff, hundreds and hundreds of clients. We do everything from domestic violence situations to crisis accommodation, to counseling, to pastoral care in our 3 Coptic colleges and in public schools. And we have a mentoring program in the Islamic school, which is groundbreaking for us as Coptic Egyptians coming from an oppressed country. What else? We do drug and alcohol, and we do. The policy is we don't say no. If God had told me where we would be at in 20 years and what we have to do, I would run for the hills. We could never have dreamt where he was taking us. And I think, he's so wonderful that God took us very, very quietly and very calmly, day by day, hour by hour, to build this organization, because the Orthodox families very reluctantly will even go to Salvation Army for counseling. They won't go to Christian counselors. They trust only the clergy. So currently we have about 38 parishes in New South Wales. We have 80 priests in New South Wales. And again, God is honestly, to me, he's hilarious, because up till literally 1 year ago, all our councils, all our boards, all our church boards, all our parish boards, all our governance would only be men. Because the term was they were board of deacons. So you had to be ordained a deacon. We don't have any ordination of women whatsoever. So even having women on a board would not have happened. Hilariously, a year ago, a new board of trustees was created in New South Wales, and for the first time in history. And we're talking almost 2,000 years of the Coptic Orthodox Church. It was founded by St. Mark in Alexandria in 42 AD. 1 year ago, 2 women were appointed to the board of trustees in New South Wales of the Coptic Orthodox Church. One of them's a white Australian. So they're laughing, and so am I. And this doesn't even happen in Egypt or in the lands of immigration for the Coptic Orthodox Church. Exodus, the service of Exodus does not exist anywhere in the world within the Coptic world, whether in Egypt or whether in America or the UK or Sweden or wherever we are, wherever you might be in the Coptic Church, Exodus service doesn't exist. This is a pioneering service where social workers, counselors, psychologists take on the community service of the community and the wider Australian community and support the priests in their work, hopefully to alleviate the burden on the priests, because they are called in if there's a family argument about what color the carpet should be. The families will call the priest in and say, we can't decide, what do you think, Father, we should have? Or our kids don't want to study medicine, can you please help us? So we've been, we had a journey of opposition, and it's still there today. However, our patriarch, who is in Cairo, Egypt, donates. He has signed two patriarchs have signed the documents that Exodus can work in the space of the Coptic Orthodox Church. We are independent. We don't answer to the church, to keep them safe and also us from being hijacked. Africa continued. We have an office there. We have an office in London that's 2 years old. I'm currently in Melbourne after 5 years of negotiation. I'm sitting in the office, Exodus office. We are now $2 million generating charity as of 2 years ago. The first 2 years, we couldn't afford the chips that we were eating in the park. We'd fight over who's buying the chips this week because they eat a lot of chips. The first property we rented was $300 a week. We split it up, $50 each. We couldn't pay the electricity. No one was paid in the beginning for the first probably good 10 years. We all were volunteers, but the work became just too heavy. And so I began to hire. I wasn't the first one hired. I hired professionals. And that's how God works. Everything, even today, if I get a family in crisis, I will be asked to set them up in a flat. Within 24 hours, I will have washing machines, fridges, down to everything I need. And this is the grace of God. And this is the God we serve and that we know. There isn't the smallest item that he doesn't worry about. I sleep at night. People say, oh, how do you sleep at night when you've got all this, all this? And I do. I go to bed every night in peace because they're his people and he will deliver. And I know hilariously that if I need a washing machine by tomorrow morning, it will be there, and it always is. And, I'm sure the people in front of me listening, you know this well, and you've lived your life with Christ. I'm 62 now, so I've been a Christian longer than I wasn't a Christian, but it will never be enough. The life on this planet will never be enough to be in his presence. And every day is valuable because it's called Exodus, by the way, because the guys thought they were in the wilderness and they were lost and they wanted to go back to the promised land, and they live in darkness. So the uniform is black, but we do have white on it in different spots, because every day we are called to bring the light of Christ into the darkest corners of people's lives. No matter how far away or how close to the gates of hell they might be, we want to set up shop. We want to be there. And it's through all of us working with the hand of God that we survive every day. And the waters are really, sometimes we are in wilderness. We will walk with these young people and they take wrong turns. It's, Exodus, the book of Exodus is, that's exactly what happened. They could see the promised land. Apparently it's like a 3-month journey, but took 40 years because they kept taking left or right turns. And it is like drug addiction is exactly like that. You relapse, and then we'll stay with you until you sort of get up and you keep moving. And I get tired, so somebody else picks up the slack, and then they get tired and two people pick up the slack. And it can be 24 hours straight. It can, that's true. But the energy comes from above. When Mary asked me to, sort of talk about that, I thought, but, what is the story? It really is the story just of a journey through the wilderness. And last year, the Promised Land was purchased. There were 6 developers that have seen our work, and they purchased a property. We don't own any assets. We own nothing. Till today, we just pay all the bills. But they walked in and bought us the Promised Land, fixed a loan so that now the rent will go towards a loan. And we hold a gala dinner, I think, in about 3 weeks' time. And it's it's entitled The Promised Land. And we're handing out milk and honey as gifts. That property is 3 times bigger than the center we are in. It's almost 900 square meters. And it will hold a chapel. It will hold counseling rooms. It will hold main areas, training areas, absolutely everything we need. And it's the nickname is the Promised Land. I just hope I get to see it. And I don't know, there's questions, I guess, whatever you would, if I've left out.
I will start off just by saying, is that the building that's going to have housing that you're going to be able to put people in when they need emergency housing?
So no, that will be headquarters. So currently we rent. What we do if we need, and it's very hard to rent in Sydney, as we all know. So Exodus has contacts now. When a family needs accommodation, we can take the lease on in our name. If they can pay some of the rent, that's great, or we will help them pay the rent so that they're secure. We also have another property that is no rent attached for 2 months. But the property that Mary is mentioning is another bunch of developers are helping us buy a block of flats, 8 flats, and they will be all for supported living. And we're just about to sign for that. That happened like last week. Yeah. Which I'm sort of, I think we're dreaming, to be honest. I still think we're dreaming, but it's all real. So 20 years, we couldn't own the chips, and now we own a headquarters and a block of flats.
And we visited Debbie one time, and she showed us on her computer a whole, was it a monastery up there, or a convent, a whole convent with all these buildings and acres, and said, somebody just donated this to us. Now, since COVID, that some problems have happened with that, but we kind of get used to these stories now when we visit Debbie to see what God has dropped in their lap. And it's always an encouragement to hear the stories. It's definitely, I was thinking about, Job, and the picture of God that we get in Job is a God that is still active in the world. And the stories we hear from Exodus and from Debbie, God is definitely still active in the world. So what questions or comments do folks have for Debbie?
I'll just make a comment because I know that there's a university that is sending their social workers students to you for what, like an internship kind of program, or they were, yeah.
Oh, no, every university in New South Wales are sending placement students, preferably to us, because they get a really good experience. And interestingly, we've got our first Catholic priest that is studying his diploma in counseling, doing his practice with us. So that came from left field. And we get all these referrals. We're now accepting referrals from every Christian organization in the country: Salvation Army, Anglicare, Catholic Care. And we are 98, and this is really the grace of God. We are 98% supported by donations. We do get grants, but when you're talking a $2 million budget, it is donations. Even I've been there from day one. I'm still in awe that this happens, still in awe. And when it isn't there, it isn't meant to be there. If things don't happen, we have learnt stubbornly that he does not want it. We have to live in peace with that.
Go ahead, Bruce.
A couple of questions, but just on the funding, would most of your donations come from the Coptic community, or would it be more widespread now?
Mostly from the Coptic community, yes. We actually have a budget bigger than some parishes.
Yes.
And now pretty much all of the 80 priests are on board with us. We've just finished, for the first time in New South Wales, mental health have done their second training with clergy, and the only clergy that have done this are Coptic priests, which is outstanding, for domestic violence and men's behaviour change. We're breaking ground culturally, not only on an Australian platform, but within, well, not even the Middle Eastern, within cultural communities, cell groups. And the joke is, it's the directors are white, Australian, history of Jewish and pagan background. This is the joke. And you've just got to see, like, God really does choose who he wants. Because if you had asked me as a 15-year-old, where I was going, no direction whatsoever. Not at all. And I see myself as that person over there. I live it every day, but this is the norm for this person. But when I look at the Coptic Orthodox Church, like, I can literally pick up this phone and ring the Pope. And the Pope of 11, 12 million Copts. Like, that's a joke. Even to me, that's a joke.
The God kind of joke. It's the best.
Yes. And who's going to object? So he does choose his people. He chooses his time. He chooses his place. Egypt is, just before COVID, I was in Egypt setting up the Office of Exodus in Egypt. I've just put it on hold for the time being until we get back in there. I'm supposed to be there in September. However, I haven't been able to leave the country at this point. Could it be God's plan? It's an exciting, I always, when I'm talking to young people, they often say, look, just show us the face of God. Show us God. I said, okay, give me your day. Pack your bags and come with me. And literally, you will walk on water and you will wonder how this is happening. And you will, if you serve others and you give of yourself, you will see the face of God. And no ocean, no height of a wave will be big enough or scary enough for you to stay in that boat. You will want to get out of that boat. You will. And I often do take them out on Botany Bay, by the way. And we go fishing, and then I always have a story like, okay, so let's get out of the boat, and making it real. This is the God of creation. He's right there. And they'll go, you're insane. You're going to tell us about that story about St. Peter. And it's like, okay, just get to the edge of the boat and put your leg over. What does it take not to look down at your troubles? What does it take to keep your eye on this Messiah? Life is tough. Life really does throw challenges at you, and you can get so absorbed by them. And Mary's been a tremendous rock throughout the many years we've known each other, for me. So if I have to whinge, it'll be Mary will hear about it. So sometimes I do sink myself, but God's hand does reach down and pull us all up if we choose to look at him. That's exciting. Walking on water is exciting.
I could tell lots of stories about things that you've gone, and it's come about, God's brought something. It's like, I never would have thought about that one. Yeah, just working with kids who are kicked out of home and helping educate them. And little did you know, homeschooling your kids were going to homeschool other kids. And, just so many things just have fallen in place over and over again.
It's happened of late. We've actually got there was a family, I should say. They did migrate into Australia and they had a son. And someone at the church said, you're just sort of struggling. If you go to the government, you'll get this and that. And they were on some sort of bridging visa. And the government found out that this child was adopted, which in an Egyptian family, there are thousands of orphans in Egypt. So the church will give them to families and that's the end of it. But this family came to Australia and the Australian government found out that the papers were forged. So child trafficking came up and the parents were deported, leaving a 15-year-old kid he was born in Egypt, but doesn't speak Arabic. He lives with us. And then, of course, he had problems at school. And, when the caseworkers went to the school, they said, well, he's just not showing up. So I said, doesn't matter. Pull him out of school. We'll homeschool them. They'll homeschool him. And they go, what do you know about homeschooling? I said, don't worry about it. We'll do it. And we do. It's like homeschooling, piece of cake. So, yeah, he lives with us. We are his family. That's one of 1,000 stories, and 1,000, yes. And we can all tell of these stories, but I think the lesson is it's just getting your hands dirty. And stories are great from other people, but it's like we have to do it ourselves to experience God. I heard stories before I was part of a church, didn't really echo much. But someone throws you in the middle of Soweto where there's hijackings. Yes, he shows up in Soweto. Yeah.
Others, questions or comments? Bruce.
Just one more. 20 years ago, I was involved with an organization called CEDA, Centre for Education and Information on Drugs and Alcohol. We were very active from the early 80s through to about 2000, then the government closed us down. But we were involved in the education and training, particularly when the AIDS hit Australia in the mid-80s. And it gave rise to harm minimisation type concept. I'm just wondering what model drug and alcohol counselling you use in your organisation. Is it the 12-step one or yeah?
Of course, yeah. So we often will refer out to a rehab centre or a program. But what we do with our people, they're very, if we're talking Coptic for a moment, they're very reluctant to do anything. They'll think the priest will solve everything.
Yeah.
So over 20 years, we've managed to secure enough trust that we will take them to an AA meeting or to a rehab centre and work with them. And it's when they come out that they relapse. So we will supply enough caseworkers, often up to 6 for one person. So someone will be assigned to finding work or accommodation and getting them back into community. So everything at Exodus is free. We don't charge for any service. Making their life, I wanted to give one verse today, which is our verse. And it's from Jeremiah 29. And it's just reminding even people in that situation that I know the thoughts that I think towards you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. And in some cases, there is very little hope. Things may not get better. But trying, if I can't provide it, then somebody else can take them out or to lunch or, something to keep that light burning. But of late, there's another bunch of some young people we served a long time ago that were cokeheads, actually. They became very wealthy. And they are now purchasing a rehab center, which will be an Orthodox style. So there'll be a chapel, there'll be icons, priests will be coming and going. You can't separate their culture and their faith. It's in their food. And so there are lots of areas we can improve on in our own rehab center for Coptic kids or families. But the 12 steps, I mean, it's God, is it not? We do have counselors, we do behavioral change, that sort of thing, CBD.
I hardly know how to ask this because I'm trying to formulate it in my mind. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation to, tell us the story, the amazing God story. We're always amazed. Maybe we should get used to the fact that God's like that. Yeah. I don't know. I never do. But thank you for that, because it's so inspiring on so many levels. But I think, and I've taken down like 4 pages of notes while you were talking. But the thing that kind of like stays with me is about within the Coptic Orthodox framework, the incredible power, in a sense, that the priesthood has, within the day-to-day life and the culture, of the people who participate in it. And I don't know, do you have any thoughts or insights as to how did the priests think about this? Do priests marry in their tradition? Are they able, because, like in the Western Orthodox, the Catholic Church as such, they're not supposed to marry, but they can in African countries, I believe. But how does that play out with this? The roles of males, females, and of course, today we've got the whole other conversation about gender and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just talking now about the priests, the power, the perceptions, and this male female kind of balance within the framework. I mean, have you got anything you can say about that?
So the patriarch and the bishops are all celibate. They're all coming from monasteries, but the parish priests are married and have been from early days. That's the first thing. The wives of the priests play a huge part in ministry, in supporting the priest. And we do have nuns and we do have deaconesses. The nuns are closeted, so we have to go to the convents to see them. They don't come outside. The sisters, the deaconesses do. They tend to be in nursing homes, kindergartens, in pastoral care programs in the colleges, hospital visits and things like that. Lay women run Sunday school, we run youth meetings and things like that. But because of so Islam invaded Egypt in the 6th and 7th century. And so there's a culture there that is attached to gender issues. But in the modern world, that is now clearing evidence, which I just gave you, which we are all stunned about. But it is looking healthy. We do have, even in Egypt, we have a woman that teaches at the Cathedral Theological College, and she teaches priests, patristics. It isn't as touchy as, it looks to others, of course, because it's a Middle Eastern church, that it is very stuck in ancient days. But I don't feel that at all. Within the families, sure, my husband was from the south of Egypt, which is notorious to being old-fashioned and all the rest of it. And to some extent, that's true. But again, God reigns. And if your wife gets called to Africa by the bishop, are you going to say anything? But it's a very heavily cultured church, and navigating it isn't for the faint-hearted. So certainly for the last 40 years that I've been in it, 40-something years. But I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Possibly if I wasn't Orthodox, I'd be Mennonite or Amish or something. if they'd have me. Yeah, if that helps.
I have to laugh when we had to leave Australia in 95, we had a red van and Debbie bought it from us. Well, early on though, when I told her that the Mennonites were taking food to people in need in Egypt, she was like, what? And then when she bought the car, she called it the Mennonite Coptic Car, MCC, which is what the Mennonite Church Relief Arm is. So she had a Mennonite Coptic car. It was the van. And what you took people, young workers all over with that van. Yeah.
Yes, it was notorious. And people, even till today, I was talking about this afternoon with the Mennonites and the Anabaptists, and they go, who are you talking about? I go, oh, give me 5 minutes of your time. I think outside of the Hearst's library, I have the biggest library of Anabaptist books possibly in New South Wales.
Well, as the timekeeper, I need to start to wrap things up. Thank you very much, Debbie, and particularly taking time in your travels to spend this hour with us.